An excavator operator with 32 years of experience was about to drive the blade into the ground when a woman in blue appeared right in front of the machine. What was buried 20 centimeters from the blade shocked everyone at the construction site. A miracle of the Virgin Mary that no one can explain. But before we continue, leave a comment saying where you are watching from and what time it is there right now. I would love to see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary are reaching. You know that kind of man who seems like he was born knowing how to do what he does? Kevin Mitchell was that man, 54 years old, thick, calloused hands with scars that told stories, 32 years operating excavators in Denver, 32 years feeling the weight of the earth through the controls as if the machine were an extension of his own body. The younger workers on the site looked at him with that silent respect. Not because Kevin talked a lot. In fact, he hardly talked at all. But when he opened his mouth, everyone stopped to listen. Do you know why? Because Kevin never made mistakes. And Kevin trusted only one thing, himself. It wasn't arrogance, it was experience. It was having seen everything, cave-ins, floods, ground that looked stable and swallowed entire machines. Kevin had been through all of that and come out the other side. So when someone talked about luck, he gave that half smile and always said the same thing. Luck doesn't exist. Preparation does. He didn't have time for superstition. He didn't have patience for stories about miracles. When his mother passed away 8 years earlier, he didn't cry at the funeral. Not because he didn't love her. He did, but because Kevin learned early on that crying doesn't change anything. Doing changes things. Working changes things. Solving problems changes things. That was how he lived. That was how he raised his 2 children. That was how he kept his marriage to Margaret going for 29 years. No drama, no sentimentality, and it worked. At least, that was what he thought. September 2019. Denver was in full expansion, new buildings sprouting on every corner, construction sites everywhere, and Kevin was in command of the main excavator on one of the biggest projects of the year. A new commercial complex in the city, 3 buildings, underground parking, deep foundations, 17 workers on the site that Tuesday. Kevin arrived at 6 in the morning, as always. He parked the pickup truck in the same place as always, grabbed the thermos of coffee, the same dented thermos he had been using for 15 years. Margaret had already given up trying to buy him a new one. The site supervisor, a guy named Davis, came to meet him with the clipboard and the day's plans. We need to dig 2 more meters in that eastern section, Kevin. Foundation for building B. Kevin looked at the map, studied the markings, water lines, sewage, electricity, everything identified, everything in place. Clear ground? Davis nodded. Clear. Kevin folded the map, slipped it into the pocket of his vest, and walked toward the excavator. The yellow and black machine he had been operating for years. He knew every sound it made. He climbed into the cab, started the engine, felt that familiar rumble that was almost comforting. Another day, another job, nothing special. Kevin positioned the excavator in the eastern section. The sun was still low, that golden early morning light that made the dust shimmer in the air. The other workers spread out across the site, some preparing concrete forms, others unloading materials, the normal noise of a large construction site. Kevin adjusted the controls, aimed at the exact spot where he needed to dig. And then, something strange. He wouldn't be able to explain it later. It was as if the air had changed, as if something had become denser around him, not cold, not hot. Just different. Kevin frowned, looked around through the cab window. Nothing out of the ordinary. Workers, machines, stacks of material. He shook his head. Must be the coffee, he thought. Margaret had made it stronger that morning. He ignored the sensation, positioned the blade over the marked point, took a deep breath, and began to lower it. What happened in the next few seconds? Kevin Mitchell would never forget for the rest of his life. The blade was going down. He was looking at the point of impact, as he always did. And then she was there, a woman, right in front of the excavator. Kevin locked the controls by pure reflex. The blade stopped less than a meter from the ground. His heart raced. Where had she come from? How had she gotten into the worksite? Why wasn't anyone screaming? But those questions lasted only a second. Because then Kevin really looked at her, and the world stopped. The woman was wearing blue, a blue Kevin had never seen before. It wasn't the blue of the sky. It wasn't the blue of the sea. It was a blue that seemed to have a light of its own. She wore a mantle that covered her head and flowed down over her shoulders and her face. Kevin held his breath. It was a face that did not belong to this world, serene in a way he had never seen in any human being, a peace that radiated, that enveloped, that penetrated. Her eyes looked straight at him, through him, as if they saw everything he was, everything he had been, everything he hid, every lie he had ever told, every time he failed, every moment of weakness he had hidden from the world. And there was no judgment in those eyes, none, only love. A love so immense, so deep, so absolute, that Kevin felt his chest tighten. A love he did not deserve, that no one deserved, but that was there anyway, poured over him like light. And then came the scent. Roses. It filled the entire cabin. A scent of roses so strong, so real, so present, that Kevin could almost touch it. It was the smell of fresh roses, as if someone had poured 1,000 petals inside that cabin. Kevin couldn't breathe. He couldn't move. The woman raised her hand, slowly, and pointed to the ground, right beneath where the blade was suspended. She pointed to the soil with a serene urgency, as if she were saying, without words, "Look at what is down there." There was no sound. She didn't say a single word. But Kevin heard it inside his chest, inside his soul, in a place he didn't even know existed. Stop. Her eyes remained on his for another moment. And then she didn't leave. She simply was no longer there. Kevin blinked. The space in front of the excavator was empty, just dirt, just golden dust floating in the morning light. But the scent of roses remained. Kevin stayed frozen in the cabin for how long? He didn't know. It could have been seconds. It could have been minutes. His hands trembled on the controls. What was that? The rational mind, the one that had commanded 54 years of life, tried to take control. Hallucination, it had to be. Fatigue, pressure. Maybe he was getting sick. Maybe he needed to see a doctor. But the scent of roses was still there. And that look, those eyes. Kevin knew with a certainty that came from somewhere beyond reason that it hadn't been imagination. She had pointed to the ground, right there. Kevin shut off the excavator's engine. The silence was almost deafening after the constant roar. He opened the cab door, stepped down the ladder slowly, his legs weak, as if he had just run a marathon. The other workers kept going with their tasks around him. No one had seen it. No one had stopped. No one had shouted. No one but him. Kevin walked to the front of the machine, the exact spot where she had been standing, where she had pointed. He crouched down, looked at the compacted soil. It looked normal. It looked like any other patch of ground at that construction site. But something inside him, something he couldn't ignore, told him to dig. Kevin grabbed a shovel that was leaning against a nearby pile of materials. He started digging, by hand, slowly. The other workers began to notice. One of them, a young guy named Tyler, came closer. "You okay, Kevin? Something happened to the machine?" Kevin didn't answer. He kept digging. 10 centimeters. 15. The shovel struck something. Metal! Kevin felt the blood freeze in his veins. He dropped to his knees, started pulling the dirt away with his bare hands. Hands that were shaking, hands that had operated machines for years without ever shaking. And then he saw it. A pipe, thick, rusted in places, running horizontally beneath the ground, 20 centimeters. The excavator blade would have hit it dead on if it had gone down. Kevin stood up slowly. "Davis!" he shouted. His voice came out hoarse, strange. "Davis!" The foreman came running. "What is it? What happened?" Kevin pointed to the hole he had dug. Davis looked, and the color drained from his face. "This isn't on the map," he said. "This isn't on any map." "What is it?" Davis was already on the phone. His hands were shaking now, too. "Gas pipeline," he said. "High-pressure line. Old. Must have been installed many years ago and never properly recorded." Kevin felt his legs give way. "If I had dropped the blade—" Davis didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both knew. An excavator blade puncturing a high-pressure gas line. 17 workers on the site that morning, 17 families who would have received the worst news of their lives. 17 lives, 20 centimeters from Kevin's blade. The construction was stopped immediately. All workers were evacuated. The gas company was called, engineers, technicians, safety teams. Kevin sat on a pile of concrete blocks, away from everything. No one asked why he had stopped. No one asked how he knew. Everyone was too busy with the emergency, with the procedures, with the phone calls. But Kevin couldn't stop thinking. She had pointed. She knew. The scent of roses was gone. The excavator cab now smelled only of diesel and earth, as it always had. But Kevin still remembered. Every detail. The blue of the cloak, the eyes that saw straight through him. One of the gas company's technicians approached after an hour. "Mr. Mitchell?" Kevin looked up. The technician was pale. "That pipeline. It isn't on any record. We're trying to understand how that's even possible. A line feeding who knows what, completely invisible in our systems." Kevin didn't say anything. The technician fell silent for a moment. "How did you know that there was something there?" Kevin looked at the man. What could he say? That a woman in blue appeared in front of the machine? That she pointed to the ground? That the air filled with the scent of roses? "Instinct," Kevin said. 32 years of experience." The technician nodded, seeming relieved by a rational explanation. "Well, whatever it was, you saved a lot of lives today." He walked away. Kevin stayed there, alone, with a truth that didn't fit into words. Kevin drove home in the late afternoon. The construction site had been suspended indefinitely. But Kevin wasn't thinking about that. He drove on autopilot, the streets of Denver passing by the window like a blur, the sun setting behind the mountains, painting the sky orange and pink. When he parked in front of the house, he stayed inside the pickup truck for a long time. Margaret appeared at the door. She had known Kevin for years. She knew when something was wrong. She walked over to the truck, opened the passenger door, got in. She didn't say anything. She just stayed there, waiting. And Kevin, the man who hadn't cried since he was 17, the man who didn't believe in anything he couldn't see and touch, the man who had built his entire life on the certainty that he was in control. Kevin began to cry. It wasn't quiet crying. It wasn't discreet tears running down his face. It was the cry of decades held back, the cry of everything he had stored away, every time he had swallowed his feelings. All the fears he had hidden, all the loneliness of always being the strong one, always the one who fixes everything, always the one who doesn't need anything or anyone. Kevin's whole body trembled. Sobs tore through his chest. Margaret held her husband's hand and waited. When Kevin finally managed to speak, his voice came out shattered. "It almost happened, Maggie. Something terrible almost happened." And he told her. He told her everything. The strange feeling before lowering the blade. The woman in blue. The mantle. The eyes. The scent of roses flooding the cabin. The hand pointing to the ground. The pipeline. 17 lives. Margaret listened in silence. When he finished, she was crying too. It was her, Kevin. Margaret said softly. It was the Virgin Mary. Kevin closed his eyes. I don't believe in those things, Maggie. You know that. My whole life I never... His voice failed. But I saw her, I felt it, the scent. Kevin opened his eyes, looking at his wife. The scent of roses, Maggie, inside the excavator's cabin. How can there be the scent of roses inside an excavator's cabin? Margaret squeezed his hand. You don't need to explain, Kevin. You don't need to understand. You just need to accept it. But why me? The question came out heavy with something Kevin didn't know how to name. Why did she appear to me? I never prayed, never went to church. Why would she save my life? Why would she save those men through me? Margaret was silent for a moment. Do you remember your mother, Kevin? He frowned. What about her? Do you remember what she did every night before going to sleep? Kevin didn't answer, but he remembered. His mother, sitting on the edge of the bed, the rosary in her hands, her lips moving in silent prayer. Every night, from the time Kevin was a child until the day she passed away. She prayed for you, Margaret said. Every day, she asked for protection for you. She asked the Virgin Mary to take care of her son. Kevin felt something tighten in his chest. Maybe, Margaret continued, maybe this isn't about what you did or didn't do, Kevin. Maybe it's about a mother's love, your mother's love, and the love of an even greater mother. Kevin couldn't respond. He stayed there in the pickup truck with his wife holding his hand while the sun finished setting behind the mountains and the first stars appeared in the sky over Denver. And for the first time in many, many years, Kevin Mitchell did not feel alone. The days that followed were strange for Kevin. The construction work remained suspended. He stayed at home, which almost never happened. Kevin didn't know how to stay still. He didn't know what to do with himself without a machine to operate, a problem to solve, a job to complete. But now he spent hours sitting on the back porch, looking at the garden Margaret took care of, watching the flowers, feeling the wind, thinking. Margaret watched from a distance. 1 week after the incident, Kevin did something he hadn't done in more than 40 years. He went into the bedroom, opened the drawer of the nightstand. At the very bottom, beneath old papers and forgotten things, there was a small wooden box, the box that had belonged to his mother. Kevin opened it. Inside a rosary, simple. Dark wooden beads, a small cross, metal already somewhat worn. He held the rosary in his hands, the same hands that operated excavators, thick, calloused hands, hands that had built and demolished and moved tons of earth over decades. Now they held that small object as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Kevin no longer knew how to pray. He had forgotten the words, he had forgotten the gestures, but he closed his eyes and tried. The words came slowly, stumbling, failing, returning in fragments of childhood memory. Hail Mary, full of grace. His voice was a rough whisper, but it was a beginning. Have you ever noticed how sometimes a person changes in a way you can't quite explain? It's not a change in appearance. It's not an obvious change in behavior. It's something more subtle, deeper. Kevin's children noticed. The oldest, Brian, 27 years old, came to visit one Sunday and found his father in the garden, helping Margaret with the roses. Kevin had never done that before. He had never had the time. He had never had the interest. But there he was, kneeling in the dirt, hands dirty, learning from his wife how to prune, how to care, how to make the flowers grow. His daughter, Emily, 24 years old, called one weekday, and Kevin answered. Normally he let it go to voicemail. He was always busy. But that day he answered and talked. For an hour, he asked about her life, about her job, about her plans. He listened. He truly listened. At the construction site, when work was finally resumed 2 months later, the workers noticed too. Kevin was still the best operator. He still had the steadiest hands and the sharpest eye, but there was something different about him now. And before starting each workday, Kevin had a new ritual. He would stand still in front of the excavator for a moment, just a moment, his hand in his pocket where he kept his mother's rosary. No one knew what he did in those seconds of silence. Kevin never told the full story to anyone besides Margaret. Not because he was ashamed, not because he thought people wouldn't believe him, but because some things are too sacred to become conversation. Some experiences belong in a space between a person and something greater, a silent space, reverent, intimate. But sometimes, in rare moments, Kevin would let fragments slip, like the time Tyler, the new kid at the site, asked how he had noticed the gas pipeline. Kevin looked at him for a long moment. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "we get help from where we least expect it, kid. Learn to pay attention, not just to the maps and the instruments, but to the rest too." Tyler frowned. "The rest how?" Kevin gave that half-smile that was his trademark. "You'll know when it happens." And he went back to work. September 2020. Exactly 1 year since that Tuesday morning, Kevin woke up early, earlier than usual. The sun had not risen yet. He dressed in silence so as not to wake Margaret, grabbed the keys to the pickup truck, and drove to the construction site that was now an almost finished commercial complex. There was no one there at that hour. Kevin parked, got out of the truck, walked across the silent ground, his boots making noise on the compacted earth, until he reached the spot. The exact place where she had appeared. Kevin stood there, motionless, staring at the ground now covered with concrete foundations and steel structures. An entire building was being constructed over that place. Dozens of people would soon work there. Thousands would pass through there over the years. None of them would ever know. None of them would imagine that at that exact spot something extraordinary had happened. That there a woman in blue had appeared to an old excavator operator. That there 17 lives had been saved by a hand pointing to the ground. Kevin took the rosary out of his pocket. The sunlight was beginning to appear on the horizon, golden, gentle, just like that morning 1 year ago. "Thank you," he whispered. The words were inadequate. He knew it. There were no words to thank something like that. There was no way to repay it. But he tried anyway. "Thank you for appearing to me. Thank you for making me stop. Thank you for—" Kevin felt his eyes burn. "Thank you for not giving up on me." The wind blew softly, and Kevin could swear. He could swear that, for just 1 second, he felt it again, the scent of roses, light, distant, like a memory, like a promise. Kevin smiled and went home to have breakfast with his wife. And every time Kevin climbs into the excavator, every time he positions the blade over the earth, he says a small prayer, not out of fear, out of gratitude. Because Kevin learned, on that Tuesday morning, that we are never truly alone, even when we think we are, especially when we think we are. And look, if you made it this far, to the end of Kevin's story, do one thing for me. Write in the comments, a mother's prayer. Because sometimes the miracle doesn't begin at the moment of danger. It begins many years earlier, in the silent bedroom of a mother who never stopped praying. I want to see how many hearts this story has truly reached. And every time I read a mother's prayer in the comments, I will know that one more person believes that miracles still happen. Before we finish, I want to invite you to be part of our prayer community for the Virgin Mary, a space of faith and hope where people from all over the world come together to pray and share graces received. If you feel in your heart the desire to be part of this chain of prayer, click below and become a member of the channel today, and come pray with us. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. Write in the comments about a miracle you have already witnessed or experienced, and share this video with someone who needs to renew their hope today. May the Virgin Mary continue blessing and protecting you and your family. Amen.